Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Okay, today, folks, we are going to be talking about yet another practical piece of advice when it comes to purchasing cars. This time, we are going to be talking about the best things to look out for when purchasing cars for new drivers. This is something that I am actually passionate about because I am 22 years old and I have just gotten out of that stage in my life in which I was, I had a lot of friends that were fresh out of high school into college. Many of us in this age range are still driving one of our first cars that our parents bought for us and that we've kept through college, or cars that we worked and bought ourselves, our first cars, quote unquote. So this is something that I'm very passionate about, I have experience in, and I thought I should impart a bit of knowledge on the car community as a whole, especially those who may be listening who may either be first-time drivers themselves, soon to be first-time drivers, or may have children who are going to be new drivers and are looking for a bit of advice on what types of cars to look for them. So I will give you a couple of things to consider, and then I will tell you at the end some of the specifics as far as cars go that you should look for when it comes to new drivers. So I'm going to tell you about the things that you need to consider, the needs of the driver. In segment 2, we're going to be discussing considering the wants of the driver, because wants are important when it comes to your cars. And segment 3, we're going to be discussing the budget of the driver. And in segment 4, we're going to be talking about the top sorts of cars to consider. So we're going to have a couple of specifics, a couple of general things to talk about. So let's get this show on the road. So in segment 1, I want to discuss considering the needs of the driver. Safety and practicality above all else. When it comes to buying cars, folks, especially for new drivers, you want something that's safe and you want something that is practical. You don't want something that's too terribly old. You don't want something that's too terribly large, too terribly small. What you're needing is something that's basically the average of all of it. Nothing too new, nothing too old, nothing too fast, nothing too slow, nothing too big, nothing too small. Virtue is the mean between extremes, as you've heard me say before. So nothing changes when it comes to that, when it comes to buying cars. Let me just elaborate on that a bit. Some cars are safe, but not all of them are practical. For example, you can get your son or your daughter a Nissan Armada for their first vehicle. But a Nissan Armada is not practical for a new driver. 3 rows of seats, 15 miles to the gallon highway, 13 city. That's, big lumbering V8 engine. The thing's 17 feet long. It's like 6 feet tall. I mean, at that point, you don't need something like that. That's not practical. It's safe, but it's not practical, at least not for the purposes of a new driver. There's some other specific things you're going to want to consider. Whereabouts does this person live? For example, people who live in the big city may want to consider small cars that are easy to park and maneuver in traffic. I'm not going to say something as small as like a Smart Fortwo or something, like a smart car as it's commonly called. You don't need something that small. I wouldn't recommend that to anyone. But something like a Prius C, a good city car. Maybe if you're looking for something a bit more expensive, a Mini Cooper. But you're not going to want something that's too terribly large when you're living in the really big city. And think of it. People who live in the big city, a lot of times they don't have cars. A lot of times they use public transportation, and the cars they do have are really just something that they can take for them to go on longer distances that they can't take a bus or they can't take an Uber to. Just it's something in terms of pure practicality alone. So these cars aren't going to be terribly fancy. They aren't going to be terribly comfortable. They're just going to get you to point A, from point A to point B without falling apart. That's basically what you're going to want to look for when you're talking about city cars. Suburban dwellers, on the other hand, like myself, may want to consider cars that are suited for both highway and city driving. Because when you live in the suburbs, you're going to be getting on the highway, or if not the highway, you're going to be getting on some state roads. Cars are going to need to, pick up the pace a little bit. You're not going to want something that's too terribly slow that can't accelerate. That being said, good acceleration is something to look for in those cars. Reasonable fuel mileage, space for luggage and cargo. The reason why I say all of these things is, like I said, when you're driving in the suburbs, you really get the best of both worlds. You get some city style driving, you get some country wide open area style driving. You're going to want a car with good acceleration simply because when you're driving in the suburbs, merging onto highways, getting off of highways, even when it comes to making right-hand turns at red lights or cutting across medians and whatnot. You live in the suburbs, there are enough people on the road all the time that you don't want to be terribly slow. If you are terribly slow, that poses a danger not only to yourself but to other people, because there is nothing worse than someone who gets a new car as their first car and it's terribly slow. That doesn't teach people to drive with confidence. When you have a car that, for example, I had a Honda Civic Hybrid for 4 months. This thing had a 0 to 60 time of 13 seconds. This was dangerously slow. And as much as I hate to say it, this is a common first car for people. Honda Civic, especially Honda Civic Hybrid, people think, oh, it's fuel efficient. We should get that. But you're not taking into account that with the fuel efficiency, you are lacking in drivability. I mean, you want your car to be safe. You don't want to give your child or a 20-something a speed demon to drive as their very first car. But at the same time, you don't want something that's so slow that if they need to make evasive maneuvers, if they need to pass, if they need to merge, if they need to get over, that they're not going to be able to. Like this car, every single move that I ever made in it had to be extremely well calculated, for the simple fact that if I thought that I was driving my old car was a Cadillac, a 0 to 60 time was half the time. It was about 7 seconds. If I thought I was driving my Cadillac, but I was actually driving my Honda Civic and I went to go do something that my Cadillac would normally do, I could end up T-boned. I could end up rear-ended. I could end up in a ditch. I mean, I could end up in so many different undesirable situations. So you don't want a car with bad acceleration. You want something that has good passing power, good pickup, because inevitably, suburban driving is going to need you to make quick decisions. City driving, not so much. City driving, people in the city tend to always be stuck in traffic. You're not going to need to do anything quickly in the city. And likewise, in the country, you're not going to need to be doing anything in the country either, because there's not really many people around. You can take your time. So, but in the suburbs where the majority of people live, you're going to need to be able to make evasive maneuvers. I speak from personal experience on that. Another thing that I said, reasonable fuel mileage. Like I said, some people want to get trucks as their first vehicles. Nothing against trucks here, but you're going to want reasonable fuel mileage, because odds are if you're going to be a suburbanite, you're going to be commuting. Some people, daily trucks like F-150s, Chevy Silverados, Dodge Rams, other things of that sort. But that's not terribly practical. For the purposes of what a new driver is going to be needing in the suburbs, you're not going to need a pickup truck. The fact is, the harsh fact is, no offense to all the pickup truck drivers out there, the vast majority of people who own pickup trucks don't actually need them. They just like them because there is some toxic pickup truck culture out there in some parts of the country, especially in the South. People feel like having a truck is a status symbol. They may never haul anything in it, but by gosh darn it, they have a truck. Yeah, you're going to want something with reasonable fuel mileage. I've considered pickup trucks before, but I'm not one to particularly care for fuel mileage per se, considering the fact that I've always driven large luxury land yachts, except for that Honda Civic. But a truck, the fuel mileage is never worth it. They're gas guzzlers, 15, 16 miles to gallon highway, 13, 14 city. I mean, that's not something you want to do to yourself, especially not a new driver, considering the demographics of who new drivers are. New drivers tend to be high school students. Maybe if you waited later, might be early college students. It could be new drivers. You don't want to stick a high school student who's working a part-time job or a college student who's working a part-time job with a hefty gas bill every month because they chose to drive a truck instead of getting something reasonable like a sedan. And this is not just for trucks in general. Some sedans have terrible gas mileage. So gas mileage is something you're definitely going to keep in mind. City cars, naturally, because they're smaller and because gas pumps are few and far between in the city, you're going to want a more fuel efficient car that can last you longer. In the country, utility probably comes before gas mileage. But in the suburbs, gas mileage is still something that is to be seriously considered. Space for luggage and other cargo, grocery shopping, things of that sort, and just in general, people who tend to live in those areas, going off to college, you're going to want a car. And this is not just, suburban dwellers. This is for big city dwellers. This is for any person considering a new car. What are your needs? You're going to need luggage space. A lot of people, especially men, I don't mean to stereotype genders here, not to say that women can't like muscle cars, but a lot of younger men tend to want Mustangs, Camaros, things of that sort. Those are not too practical. You can't really fit luggage in there. You can't really fit other people. I mean, they're effectively, technically four-seater cars, but they are practically two-seater cars because the back seats in those things are too terribly cramped. You can't really fit any reasonably sized adult in there. They might be reasonable for children for short distances, but I mean, that's not something that you can put your friends in, that you can put your suitcases in and then move on to college. I mean, believe me, I've seen some people do it before, but it's not fun. You don't want to do something like that. So you're going to want to steer clear from cars that are too small to be of any practical use either. Those cars might be good for when you have a career and you can afford a second car. That's a car that can be fun instead of a car that you're going to daily. And country dwellers. Country dwellers may want to consider cars that have higher ground clearance, suitable for rough roads and light off-road situations. So cars of this category include crossovers, light-duty trucks, compact SUVs, etc., preferably with all-wheel drive capability. This is something that I want to express. Even though I had just said that trucks are probably not a good idea for newer cars, or for cars for new drivers, I should say, if you live in the country, that's a different story. Because I've been in the country before. Many places still have gravel roads, if not gravel roads, dirt roads, and the asphalt roads they do have, frankly, suck. There's potholes, there's other things of that sort, because not many people live in the country, so it's as if though the powers that be don't feel it necessarily important to keep those roads up to par. So rough roads, light off-roading conditions, you're going to want a crossover, you're going to want a light-duty truck. We're talking about your Ford Ranger, your Chevy S10, maybe if you want to go bigger, a Ford F-150, but things of that sort. You're going to want some lighter-duty trucks, some crossovers, maybe some compact SUVs, things that are a bit higher off of the ground that can handle, the roughness of the roads. You're not going to want something like a Mustang that's real low to the ground, and that if you get a pothole, you might end up blowing a shock tower or something like that. You don't want something like that when you live in the country. And people in the country, simply due to their lifestyle, tend to actually need to haul things around. Not to say that this is the case of all country dwellers, but a lot of country dwellers need to haul things around in the beds of their trucks. So in that case, even if you are a new driver who ends up being a high school student, if you need to help around your house, if you need to help around your family's small business and whatnot, you might want to consider either getting something with a bit more cargo room or getting something with a bed like a small pickup truck, because those things prove to be very practical in the country. And last but not least, before we move on to the next segment, just most new drivers, as we obviously know, tend to be high school students. Like I said before, they want something with enough space for luggage when college comes around, and enough space to safely haul your friends, and nothing too fancy lest they get damaged. So what I mean by something to safely haul around your friends, you and I both know, everybody knows, that one person who had a smaller car, but they were the ones who had the car, so they cramped all their friends in. They would cramp like 6 people into a Toyota Corolla. We all know that person. If you had a car that could actually seat 5 or 6 people, you wouldn't need to do that, because a Toyota Corolla, even though it has 5 seats, is effectively a 4-seater car, because you can't fit 5 adults in there comfortably. You can fit 4 comfortably. So we don't want to end up, putting new drivers in the position where they're going to, not be able to haul their friends around, because high school students, college students, aka most of them are new drivers anyway, are going to be the type to have social lives that are going to want to haul their friends to go places, whether they're going to go, to a party, or whether they're going to go to a movie or some other event, maybe a club to go dancing or something. You're going to want something that is suitable for the person's social life and that can safely all around their friends and family, so they don't end up having to sit on each other's laps and do all sorts of foolishness, because believe me, they will do it. Wherever there's a will, there's a way. You can fit 6 people into a Toyota Corolla. It may not be comfortable, it may not be legal, but you can do it. Why not give them a legal alternative to give them a car that has, 5, 6, maybe even 7 seats, depending on how large you want to go. So please stay tuned for the next segment, because in that segment, we are going to be talking about the wants of the driver. And this is something that I've got a short rant about, so you're going to want to hear it. Stay tuned after the break, folks.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Okay, welcome back, my wonderful car lovers. So in segment 1, we discussed basically considering the needs of the driver. What does a new driver need? What different types of needs they may have depending on the places they live, etc., etc. So moving on to segment 2, we're going to want to consider the wants of the driver. I have always said that cars are an extension of your personality. Nobody wants a car they find ugly or something they don't quote unquote vibe with. Parents may have a decency to force boring cars on their teens in an attempt to keep them safe. Yeah, I have a problem with that. Maybe it's because my father gave me a say in which car I had. Not my first car, but the first car was a hand-me-down, but in my second car, he let me choose which car I wanted to have, and I chose something that I liked. I believe new drivers, especially this is more directed towards parents. Parents, when your children are going to be getting new cars or they're going to be getting their first car, I understand budget may be a constraint. We'll talk about budget later. But you're going to want to get something that your child can vibe with, something that fits with their personality. You're going to end up having to trust your child. It's an issue of trust. And of course, I'm not going to go way into deep with that because this is a car podcast nonetheless. But I will say fun cars don't necessarily have to be unsafe. A compromise can always be reached. We all see those memes on the internet in which, they show a child getting this piece of crap car that paint is different colors and it's dented up and be like, yeah, this is your first car. You're like, come on, folks. Like, I once saw, some parents get their daughter a 1992 Lincoln Continental. Come on, y'all. I mean, I understand, granted, that might be what they could afford, but for the price they spent on that hunk of junk, I mean, they could have got something that the daughter would have actually appreciated, or at least got her input. Say, these are the cars we can afford. Which one do you want, instead of making the decision for them? Because at this time, new drivers are becoming adults. They can make their own decision. And frankly, parents, you're not going to be the one stuck driving the car. You're not going to be the one being made fun of for driving an old people's car in the school parking lot. You're not going to be the one having to deal with the social repercussions of that. So I would say the wants of the driver are important. The wants of the driver should be considered. The wants of the driver, if you can, should be met. It's unfair. It's unfair. It's not good for, parents to purposely choose something that they know their child is not going to like. I've been there before. When I was getting my third car, I gave my dad a list of 40 cars to look out for when he was making a decision to purchase a car, because my Cadillac had crapped out. This was sophomore year. I needed a car ASAP. So I was driving one of his cars until he can buy me a car. And he was going to go to an auction. I gave him a list of 40 cars, everything from Subaru Legacies to Buick Roadmasters. I told him, look out for all of these cars and get me one on the list. 40 cars, I tell you, folks. He managed to get the one type of car I told him not to get, which was a hybrid car. He got me a Honda Civic Hybrid. Am I ever going to live that down? Absolutely not. I was livid. I told him I wasn't going to keep it for more than 6 months. And lo and behold, I didn't keep it for more than 6 months. I kept it for 4 months. Now, I'm not trying to say that, children should be ungrateful for what their parents get for them, but parents, do not cause your children to be upset with you because you get them a car that they absolutely hate. At least consider their wants, because at the end of the day, the car is an extension of their personality. Like I said, fun cars are not necessarily unsafe. Rather one speeds in a car that can handle the speed instead of one that can't, because young people are going to speed anyway. Too many times. I drive on the highway all the time. Too many times I see young folks on the road pushing 90 on the highway in Honda Civics or Toyota Yaris's, and I say a prayer for them because their cars just can't handle that speed. God forbid they run over a coconut and that's it for them. I mean, of course, the odds of you running over a coconut are probably next to nothing on an interstate, but the sentiment is still there. You get these economy cars that have these thin little tires that can barely hold up the weight of the car. And then you get these kids who are young drivers who are speeding because that's what young people do. I am guilty of it. I speed. I drive an average of 85 miles per hour on the interstate, and the interstates here in Florida are 70 miles per hour. I'm pushing 85 to 95 on the interstate. I already know. But my car can handle it. I have a 2004 Buick Park Avenue Ultra. I have good, meaty tires, a suspension, a big, heavy car, road-hugging weight that can handle that. I mean, I've hit 100 in my car before, and you don't even realize you're going 100 until you look down at the speedometer. A Honda Civic, granted, can do 100. Should it be doing 100? Absolutely not. A Toyota Yaris can do 100. Should it do 100? Absolutely not. These cars, these economy cars that parents tend to buy for their children, oh, well, it's slow, therefore it must be safe. That's not true. I would rather my child speed in a car that is built to handle that than them speeding in a car that has these thin little eeny-weeny tires on it that, I don't know, could pop or could do something, or if you hit a rut in the road, boom, tire explodes, and then your car goes all over the place. You gotta have to trust your children. And you have to keep in mind that children are inherently foolish. New drivers are inherently foolish, not just children, because they're not even children at that point. They're driving. New drivers are inherently foolish. They're going to get to a point where they're going to want to push their car to the limits. They're going to speed, and they're going to do other things. Get them a car that can handle that, because you know they're going to do it. Even though they might tell you they're not doing it, don't believe them. They're going to do it. So make sure they have a car that can handle that. I'm not saying get them a sports car like a Lamborghini, but I'm just telling you to get them a car that is big enough, that is heavy enough, that has wide enough tires, that if it gets to that point where they are speeding, you know the car can handle that speed. It can go up to those miles per hour without fear of some sort of bodily injury happening to the driver or to other people around. Because those small cars are not meant for that speed. You can easily lose control. I mean, it's happened to friends of mine. I mean, granted, her car had some, defect that caused it to flip over, but still, I mean, these cars are just not safe at high speeds. If you know your child's going to be speeding, which you know your child's going to be speeding, you know your new driver's going to be speeding, you might as well get them a car that can handle it. That being said, let's move on at risk of going over time. A compromise can always be reached. A first car can be fun, it can be stylish, and it can be safe. You just have to do your research. I find that a lot of people who are buying cars don't know anything about cars. They know next to nothing. And, these are the type of people who are going to go get their, son or daughter a Mitsubishi Mirage as their first car for like $12,000 off the lot. Do you know what you could do with $12,000? And you're going to go waste it on a Mitsubishi Mirage because it's safe. It's fuel efficient. It's slow. They won't do anything. You sound like an idiot. You sound like someone who doesn't know how to buy cars. So you might want to listen to the podcast on buying used cars. But nonetheless, at risk of sounding too mean, let me explain you why. You can get your child something that's a lot safer, a lot more reliable, a lot more stylish, a lot more everything in respect for the price you get a new economy car. You take your Chevy Sparks, your Mitsubishi Mirages, your Toyota Yaris brand new, probably $11,000, $12,000 if we're being generous. All right. With $11,000, $12,000, you could have gotten a car that was 5-6 years old, that had maybe 40, 50,000 miles on it, that was a lot better than those cars that you were going to waste your money on. Don't make the mistake of not doing your research. A lot of times I see my friends, especially in high school, I saw my friends get some of these cars, and granted, you should be thankful it's a car, but I'm like, dang, if only I were there to give them advice on what sorts of cars to buy. I mean, yes, you want something that fits with your personality, but y'all, you gotta make wise decisions. This is gonna be your car. You're gonna spend a lot of time in your car. You're gonna be going to school. You're gonna be going to church. You're gonna be going to work. You're gonna be going to all sorts of different places with your car. I mean, you're gonna want something that, that fits your personality, that you didn't just get because that seemed to be, the next best thing. This is a car. Yeah, I'm gonna buy it because I need a car. I mean, nah, man. Even if your budget's $1,000, there are good cars you can get for $1,000. You just need to do your research. Do your research. Research is everything. You want to do so much research that you can write a book on the type of car that you're going to end up buying. So let me just explain to you what I mean by compromise can be reached. If your young man wants a muscle car, it may not be that bad of an idea to get him one. And let me explain you why. Not only will he speed, his car will be able to handle the speed. And most muscle cars come with V6 variants. There's even 4-cylinder variants nowadays of muscle cars that can get better fuel mileage. So, it may not be bad for you to give in to what your child wants, granted that it fits in your budget. If it's out of your budget, then, obviously it's a no-go. But it may not be that bad to give in to what they want, simply because you're happy, they're happy, and they are more inclined to take care of a car and want to keep it if it's something that they like. Too many times I see people get cars that they don't like, they abuse them, and then they end up running them into the ground and the car doesn't, last because simply they didn't like the car and they don't care about them. I mean, granted, you would be rather foolish to do that, but new drivers are foolish anyway. These are the type of people that are like, I don't care about the car. I don't like it anyways. I'm not planning on keeping it. Why don't you get them something that they like, that they're planning on keeping, so that they can actually take care of it and save you a lot of money in the long run? And likewise, with parents that have young ladies. If your young lady wants a cute car, even though they tend to be on the small side, any car made in modern times, and by modern times I'm talking about mid-90s and up, is going to be safe on modern roads. So, I don't recommend buying small cars, but if your girl wants a Volkswagen Beetle, Volkswagen Beetles are generally reliable. There's no huge problems, granted, if you keep up with them. They are German cars. But if your girl wants a Volkswagen Beetle, my friend Taylor Livingston has a Volkswagen Beetle Cabriolet. Her car has probably almost 200,000 miles on it. It's never given her any huge problems. Of course, it's given her problems here and there, but it has almost 200,000 miles on it. Of course, it's going to give problems, but it's been generally reliable for her, and she wanted a cute car. Her parents got her that, and she's had it for as long as I've known her, and I've known her for 4 years. So, it may not be that bad to give in to what your child wants. And, the thing is, it's sort of a myth that a car cannot be both safe and fun. Don't let yourselves fall into that myth. But moving on to the next segment, we are going to be talking about considering the budget of the driver, or the person that's buying the car for the driver. Budget is important, but please stay tuned after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right. Welcome back, wonderful car people. This is segment 3 of our podcast. And in the last segment, we discussed considering the wants of the new driver when it comes to buying a car for them. So in this segment, we are going to be considering the budget of the driver. And we are going to speak in the 4th segment, if you stay tuned, about some of the top cars to consider, some of the top sorts of body styles and classes of cars you're going to want to consider when buying a car for a new driver. So let's get started. You're going to want to avoid brand new cars. I'm going to tell you that right off of the bat. brand new cars, even for people who aren't new drivers, brand new cars, in my opinion, are just not worth it. The only time I would say if you're going to buy a brand new car is if it's a car that you know you're going to keep. You're not going to try to resell it. And on top of that is if you're a person who doesn't know anything about cars, and every time a car gives you a problem, you're just going to take it to the dealership. I mean, that's all I can say. Brand new cars are not worth it, especially when it comes to a brand new driver. You're not going to want to give a brand new driver a brand new car. There's just so much that can go wrong. They're too expensive. The depreciation is unreal. New cars depreciate like rocks. And that depends on how much money you spend for it anyway. But let's just say you buy a new car today and then you try to return it tomorrow. They're going to give you like 30% off the original value of the car for what you bought it for because it's considered used now. And you might have put 1 or 2 miles on it. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. Depreciation is unreal. Depreciation is not your friend when it comes to buying a new car. And frankly, new drivers tend to get into fender benders. When I first got my first car, it had been in the family for 10 years. It had never really gotten into any major car accident. I mean, it's bumped things here and there, but it never had gotten into an accident. I had been driving since July of 2015. In December of 2015, I got rear-ended. First day of December 2015, I got rear-ended. If I had been driving a brand new car, I'd be sorely disappointed. Granted, a brand new car, they would have fixed it. My car was considered a total loss because it was only worth $1,500. But still, if it had been so bad that the brand new car could not have been replaced, that would have been a bunch of money we would have been wasting. So it's just, it's really one of those things that you don't want to do. When it comes to considering the budget, you're going to want to avoid brand new cars. They're too expensive, depreciation is unreal, and fender benders. You don't want to do that to something that's new. Realistically, I'm going to set the bar actually pretty low. You can get a proper first car for around $5,000. Yeah, your car is not going to be brand spanking new, obviously. It might not even be 5 years old. It might be in that 5 to 10 year range as far as age goes. But when you really think of it, this is exactly the type of car that a new driver needs. It might actually even be 15 to 20 years old, but you're going to get a new driver who is undoubtedly going to scrape things, undoubtedly going to hit mailboxes, who's going to, maybe scrape a car in the parking lot or maybe come too close to a wall at a bank drive-through and then they're going to scrape their mirror. I speak from personal experience. That's why that's a very specific example that happened to me on my first car. But these are things that are just going to happen. You don't want to go get a car that's all pristine, all shiny, barely has any miles on it. You're going to want to get something that's not rough. Don't get your person a beater car. Nobody wants a beater car as their first car. But get a car that if it were to get a scratch on it, you wouldn't freak out. You don't want a brand new car. Too many times I saw kids with brand new Mercedes-Benzes, brand new Cadillacs, other sorts of cars in the parking lot at school. I grew up in a fairly wealthy area. Man, every time I look back on that, I just shake my head. I mean, there was literally a girl who had a brand new Mercedes-Benz in the parking lot and another girl with a brand new Cadillac. I mean, why put that in the hands of 16, 17-year-old drivers that undoubtedly are going to get their cars damaged? You got and paid a bunch of money for this car, probably paying a bunch every month for it, and then you're going to go leave it in the hands of a teenager for them to go wreck it. I mean, come on, man. Come on. I mean, at that point, if you're going to buy a brand new car, at least take the brand new car for yourself and give your child your car that's already been around the block a couple of times. Don't ever get your child a brand new car. Don't ever get a new driver a brand new car. It's not worth it. Realistically, if we're speaking budget, you can get a proper first car for $5,000. Cars from the early 90s to early 2010s can be bought for a reasonable price. Granted, now that we're moving further and further into the 2000s. We're in 2020. This is the third decade of the 2000s. You had the 2000s, you had the 2010s, now we're in the 2020s. I mean, yeah, you're maybe not going to want to be getting 90s cars at this point because they're all considered classic cars at this point. Granted, some are considered modern classics. You might not want to get 90s cars simply for the fact they're going to be old. They're going to require some maintenance. They might spend a bit of time in the shop before they're perfect. Yeah, 90s cars may not be so much practical anymore. But if we're talking about early 2000s cars, 2010s cars, you can buy those for a reasonable price. I'm just thinking off the top of my head right now, you can get yourself a Cadillac Seville, a Cadillac STS, a Cadillac CTS for about $5,000. All of those cars. Some might even be cheaper than that. Those are good cars. Those are good cars. Those are luxury cars. I always recommend luxury cars because luxury cars tend to be built better. Luxury cars tend to be more comfortable. And luxury cars a lot of times might even be more reliable. At least, better put together than cars of other sorts of price ranges, if I could put it that way. But, that's something you want to consider. Cars from the 90s, early 2000s, early 2010s can be bought for a reasonable price. Just keep those in mind. Like I said, 90s, maybe not so much anymore, considering the fact that they're just super old at this point. But you can still get yourself a decent 90s car. Factor in maintenance as well. There's a lot of times I see people who don't know cars, who go and buy a car because it's a good deal, and they completely forget to factor in maintenance costs as well. That's something you're going to need to do when you're buying a first car, whether it be brand new or whether it be used. You're going to want to factor in maintenance costs. Obviously, if you go with the used alternative, you're going to be having to factor in more for maintenance costs because new cars tend to come with warranties. So if anything ever happens to the car while you're driving it, you can take it back and get it covered under warranty and get it repaired for free at the dealer until the warranty runs out. Used car, not so much. You're not going to want to go get a used car that may be a good price, but has a ton of hidden problems. For example, European cars. Stay away from used, cheap European cars. I don't care if it's, oh my gosh, it's only $3,000 and it only has 140,000 miles. No. I can't stress this enough. Stay away from Mercedes-Benz. Stay away from BMW. Stay away from Volvo. Stay away from Audi. Stay away from Volkswagen. Stay away from Jaguar. Stay away from Land Rover. Stay away from all of those European brands. Some are better than others, but stay away from all of them. Because for a first driver, you might get yourself a Mercedes-Benz S-Class for $5,000. And then your airmatic suspension goes out on you. And this is a new driver we're talking about who has no idea what even an airmatic is. Frankly, I don't even have any idea why the airmatic even exists, let alone what it is. I mean, it's an air suspension, but boy goodness, it seems to have a mind of its own. It might be more than just an air suspension. Who knows? It might be the air suspension of the future. It doesn't matter because it doesn't belong in any car, let alone a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. It's already had a bunch of, issues in itself. So I digress. You're going to go buy yourself, it's a Mercedes-Benz. I'm going to get a Mercedes-Benz for my first car. So you go and spend, let's say you had a budget of $5,000. You're going to spend all your $5,000 on this car. Then your airmatic goes out. You need to get a certified Mercedes-Benz mechanic to work on this or convert it to all springs all around. That's $2,000 out the window. Then something else goes out. Another $400. Something else goes out. A $500 job. If you've calculated properly, you're about $2,900 into a $5,000 car. And this is your first car. You don't want to do that. My friend Haley, bless her heart, goodness. Her first car was a BMW, I believe, 3 Series. BMWs were known for their Vanos units going out in the era that she had hers. I think it was a mid-90s BMW 3 Series. It was known for their Vanos units going out. Vanos is BMW's variable valve timing system. She bought the car for $1,000. Good deal, right? BMW. Oh, it just needed some work. What was the work? A Vanos unit. You know, Haley never ended up driving that car. It was her first car, but she never ended up driving it because she never could afford to get the Vanos unit fixed. And then she ended up, I don't know if she sold it. I don't know if she junked it. I don't know whatever happened to that car. She never drove it. She ended up using her parents' Ford Fusion, and then they ended up getting a new car for themselves and then giving Haley their Ford. Because they made the mistake, she made the mistake of buying a cheap European car. You're always going to want to factor in maintenance costs when it comes to, buying cars. It's not just buying the car and then not knowing that you need to do maintenance and not knowing that you need to buy insurance and put insurance on the car, because in the United States, it is illegal to drive a car without car insurance. So you need car insurance on the car. Not only that, moving on to the question of car insurance. Let me see. Where was I? Moving on to the question of car insurance. Red cars carry higher insurance premiums because of the myth that red cars are more likely to be pulled over by police. V8 powered cars, simply because of their engine size, carry more insurance costs because V8s, not necessarily, but in the minds of the auto insurance companies, means faster. Therefore, it is faster. It must be more dangerous. So it's not a good thing. We're going to charge you more because you're more likely to get into a crash. Turbocharged and supercharged cars are also more expensive because they are considered performance cars. And cars of a high value are also more expensive. So your Mercedes-Benz, even though you may have gotten it for $5,000, may have $250 a month worth of insurance instead of your Buick that might have $150 a month worth of insurance. And you may have also bought your Buick for $5,000 because the Mercedes-Benz has more value than the Buick. And young drivers are considered at risk as well. So in this segment, or in this, not in this segment as in the segment of the podcast, but in this segment of the car population of people who are going to be driving, in this segment, young drivers are the most at risk because they have the least amount of experience and they are the most likely to do foolish things behind the wheel, thus causing crashes. So insurance companies are going to take a look at the age of the person, what gender they are. And you would think that in a world where, gender equality is a thing, you would think that they would stop charging men more for car insurance than women, but that's not it. That obviously hasn't changed. But if you are a male and you are young and you drive a V8 car and it's supercharged, let's say, and it happens to be red, you've got all the wrong things going for you. You're going to get an insurance premium that is through the roof. Factor that into the cost of the car as well. You might get yourself a nice red, a nice red Mustang. And it might be, I don't know if they come supercharged from the factory, but you might get yourself a nice red Mustang. Red Mustang, you know what? You're a male, you have a red Mustang, this is your first car, Mustang has a V8 engine in it. Insurance premium is going to go through the roof because it's red, because it's a Mustang, and it has a V8 engine, so therefore it's considered a performance car. And because you're a male, it also costs more. So you just keep those in mind. Always consider the prices of insurance and the prices of maintenance as well when it comes to discerning which car you're going to buy. So this is the end of segment 3, really. Stay tuned for segment 4, in which I'm going to talk about some of the top cars to consider, some specifics, some things to look out for, and some things to avoid. So please stay tuned after the break.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, car people. So, in this segment, we're going to be talking about some of the top cars to consider. In the last segment, we talked about considering the budget of a new driver. In segment 2, we talked about considering the wants of a new driver. And in segment 1, obviously, we talked about considering the needs of a new driver. So now that you know the things to consider, here's some top cars to consider. And I'm not going to move on to specifics just yet. I'm going to give sort of a category of car and then give some specific cars that fall into that category. So please bear with me. Cars to consider. Older American or Japanese luxury cars. I am an older American luxury car sort of person, and I can tell you these have been the cars that I have driven since I started driving 5 years ago, and I have no regrets for having a love affair with this segment of the car world. Older American luxury or Japanese cars. So you get your Lincolns. Things like Lincoln Town cars. Granted, you're going to want to consider style, consider price, consider this, consider that. But Lincoln Town cars, great first car. Yes, it's an old person car. Yes, it may be a gas guzzler. But boy, are they reliable? Are they safe? Are they built well? That is a wonderful new car. Cadillacs. Cadillac DeVilles. I know these tend to have the North Star engine, especially in the price range you're going to be looking for in an older driver, in a newer driver, I should say. Cadillac DeVilles, despite the fact that they have the North Star engine, we've had 4 Cadillac DeVilles in our family. My first car was a 1998 Cadillac DeVille. My second car was a 1997 Cadillac DeVille. My brother's first car was a 2002 Cadillac DeVille. And his second car was a 2002 Cadillac DeVille. So we know that these cars are not as bad as they make them seem. The North Star engine is not that terrible. These cars are solid. If you take care of them, they can be very reliable, and they're stylish enough. They're fast. They're not really good on gas, but you're going to give a little to get a little as far as first cars go. These cars, and plus, it's a status symbol. You get to say that you drive a Cadillac as your first car. Granted, your Cadillac might be old and kind of beat up, but it's still a Cadillac nonetheless. Lexus. Lexuses are wonderful cars. Lexus LS, Lexus GS, Lexus ES, Lexus IS. All of Lexuses are wonderful because you get the reliability of a Toyota with the luxury of a Cadillac, I can say. Lexus are great vehicles. They tend to be extremely reliable because of their Toyota roots, and they're not too terribly expensive. Granted, they hold their value better than some other luxury brands do, but you can get a good proper Lexus in the $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 range. That is not too terribly out of question when you're purchasing a new car. You might even be able to find one that's a bit older for less than that. Lexuses tend to be taken very good care of by their owners, so you're going to want to look out for your Lexus LS, your Lexus GS, your Lexus ES, your Lexus IS. IS probably the most common for a newer driver because they're smaller, but you don't have to worry about that when it comes to a Lexus. Acura. Acuras are very good cars as well. My friend Dante, his first car was an Acura TSX. His car was a very good car. As far as I know, I don't think that car ever broke down on him. Never gave him problems. Same thing with a Lexus. An Acura is just a Honda that's been fancied up, and you know how reliable Hondas tend to be. So you don't have to be worried about driving an Acura because Acuras tend to be very, very good cars. Infinitis, especially some of the ones from the early to mid 2000s when Nissan was still making proper reliable vehicles. Infinitis are a good choice for a first car. I think Infiniti G20 off the top of my head, which was a rebadged Nissan Sentra. Granted, it's smaller, but it's nice, well put together, tend to be very reliable. So Infiniti is not out of the question. At risk of, ending the list a bit too early, you're going to want to consider mid-size sedans. I'm not going to give any specifics, but there's tons of mid-size sedans out there. Mid-size sedans are large enough to be safe, but small enough to be manageable in size. So a mid-size sedan is practically the most practical car for a new driver. My friend Shannon has a Ford Fusion. That was her first car. She's owned it for about 5 years. She loves it, and she doesn't think she's ever getting rid of it. That's a mid-size sedan. Mid-size sedans, like I said, they offer the convenience of having a smaller car because they tend to be more fuel efficient, but it offers the comfort of a larger car, and it offers the safety of a larger car because simply it has sheer bulk. I mean, mid-size sedans are larger than your subcompact and your compact sedans, obviously. So that's something you're going to want to consider is mid-size sedans. You're not going to want to consider something that is, that's ungainly, I guess. I mean, like, I don't even know what to say. You're just not going to want to consider something that's too large or too small because then you run into problems. You can also consider small crossovers. Toyota RAV4s. Let's see. There is a new Honda out there. I can't remember what the newest, smallest Honda is. I mean, Honda Passports are pretty small. I'm pretty sure there's one smaller than that, though. Maybe it's a Toyota, but I can't remember. Toyota RAV4s, Honda Passports, things of that sort. Your Ford Escapes, your smaller crossover vehicles, because, they have cargo room and a high driving position. And it's really the trend of what everybody's going for nowadays. Everybody's going for a crossover. Everybody wants a car that's higher, a bit more capable. So those might be good cars to consider when you are considering buying a car for a new person. The reason why I did this podcast, if I may share a story for you all, is because I'm part of a car group on Facebook, obviously, and it's called Underappreciated Survivors, one of the many that I am on. And there's this man who posted a picture of, get this, a 1985 Mercury Grand Marquis Coupe. Granted, the Mercury Grand Marquis Coupes are not very common. This one only had 46,000 miles on it. It looked to be an absolute gem. It looked to be a little bit rough around the edges, but nothing so crazy that it was undrivable and that it wasn't worth saving. This car was totally worth, saving. It didn't even need a full restoration. It just needed to be prettied up and then put back on the road. I mean, that's all it needed. But this man, being the smooth brain that he is, bless his heart, he thought that it would be a good idea for him to get this 35-year-old car and give it to his daughter, who is 20 years old, as her first car to go off to college. Oh my goodness. The car is 15 years older than his daughter. The car has no airbags. The car barely has seatbelts. Those cars of that time period still had drum brakes. It is a death trap waiting to happen. This is what I mean, folks. It's because of stories like that I get inspired to do podcasts like this, warning people and trying to educate them as far as cars speak and car customs go and other sorts of car things. You're not going to want to get your daughter a 40-year-old car, almost 40 years old. It's 35 years old. It might as well be 40. A 40-year-old car and expect her to drive it. That car is nearly twice her age. It's not safe. It's not practical. She's going to get made fun of when she's driving it. Fuel mileage is undoubtedly subpar and maybe even downright horrible, depending on what you look at it. You're not going to want that for a first car, especially not for a 20-year-old college student who's going to be having a life, who's going to need to get a job. It's going to be unreliable at that age. What this man should do, and please, everybody, listen in your ears. What he should have done is, if he wanted that car so bad, he could have bought it for himself and given his daughter his car, depending on what kind of car he had. I doubted that his car was a rusty bucket of bolts like that Grand Marquis was. But if he was going to buy it, he could have bought it for himself, given his daughter his car, problem solved. But he was thinking about getting it, and he asked for our opinions. Obviously, I commented, and I was like, look, man, as much as I love the car, it's great, but at that age, it's probably becoming unreliable. It's not safe. If you really want to get your daughter a luxury car, get her something that's a bit more modern, that's going to keep her safe in case if she crashes. These things probably had primitive, crumple zone technology. They probably had all sorts of primitive fixtures in them because this is a 35-year-old car. You don't want that car to be your daughter's or your son's first car that they're going to be dailying. I mean, think of it. You're dailying this car, and all of a sudden, I don't know, man, you might need a blower motor for the air conditioning. Okay, try going to your AutoZone tomorrow and asking for a blower motor for a 1985 Mercury Grand Marquis. Tell me what they say. You're going to find that most of them, for a car that old, for a part that old, that's 35 years old, they're going to be like, oh, nah, man, we don't have anything like that in stock. You're going to have to go to the dealer because we're not sure when we're going to get something in like that. Or we can order it for you, blah, blah, blah. You're not going to be able to get this part the day that you need it, because you're driving a car that's so stinking old. Cars that are that old are never a good idea for new drivers. And cars that are super new are never a good idea for new drivers either. So that's really what prompted me to record this podcast, is because this man really didn't seem to know what he was doing. I mean, he really thought that almost 40-year-old car would have been good for his daughter to go to college in. She would have gotten made fun of, and things could have happened in that, in that car that she never decided to get maintained, because new drivers tend to neglect their cars. So you're going to go and get a gem of a Mercury Grand Marquis with only 46,000 miles on it over the past 35 years, and then you're going to throw it away in the hands of a college student or in the hands of a high schooler for them to drive. I mean, come on, man. If you're going to be doing that, wait until your child actually has car knowledge and they want a challenge. They want a car that's 40 years old that they know they're going to have to take care of. For example, when I got my Cadillac DeVille, my dad didn't want me to get another Cadillac DeVille. He told me that if I was going to get this car, I had to do the maintenance in it and I had to get gas to put in it. And lo and behold, what I used to do, I used to cut my grass. Every 2 weeks, I used to get $20. I used to use that $20 to put gas in the car. Whenever my mom would come and visit, she would bring me money, and sometimes I would use that money to save up for whenever the car next gave a problem for me to get it fixed. If your child was a person like me who was resourceful and who could actually take care of a used car, maybe you can get them something that old, and that's a big maybe. But the reality is most new drivers aren't like that. So you're not going to want to do something like that. But yeah, that's basically my advice. When you're going to be buying new cars, please, 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 please consider the needs of a new driver. Consider the wants. Wants are still important. Consider the budget, and consider some of the more specific cars that you can think of when you're going to give your daughter or your son a new car. So thank you so much for listening to this edition of the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you could please listen to us, leave us a like, leave us a comment, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and leave a comment that really helps us, and a review, if you will. So please stay tuned, or not stay tuned. Please have a good night, and we'll hear from you next time. Thank you.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.